everyone. Thanks for coming along today to hear about our design system at Skyscanner and our journey along the way over the last year. I'm James. I'm a designer and maker, and I'm from Edinburgh. It's not always this grey in Edinburgh. We do have our fair share of bad weather, but it is the birthplace to Harry Potter's J.K. Rowling. We have one of the world's biggest New Year parties called Hogmanay, and a great place if you like whiskey. If you're not a fan of whiskey, we make our own Edinburgh gin, so I definitely recommend visiting sometime. And I work here at Skyscanner. So some of you might be wondering, who are Skyscanner? Well, we like to think of ourselves as the world's travel search engine. And we're most notably known for our flight comparison search. But we also do hotel search and car rental as well. So I thought it'd be good to give you a bit of quick facts about Skyscanner before getting stuck into the design systems presentation. We were founded in 2003 by this lovely chap here, Gareth Williams, one of our co-founders. And now we're nearly 1,000 employees worldwide across 11 global cities. So Edinburgh, Glasgow, London, Budapest, Sofia, Singapore, Barcelona, Beijing, Shenzhen, Tokyo, and Miami. I think that's 11. And to give you a little sense of the kind of scale that we're dealing with is that we have over 60 million monthly active users using our product. And a total so far of 70 million app downloads. Some of you might be aware that we were recently acquired by Chinese travel giant Ctrip. I'm led to believe that one of these buildings here is their offices in Shanghai. Hopefully one day I'll get to visit. So let's get started. Kind of like to set the scene a little bit so that you can get a bit of context to where we were as a business. Where we've come and where we're going, and why a design system has really helped us in our growth. So if we rewind a few years back to 2014, we had one giant monolithic code base for our entire product. Say what you like about monoliths, but for us, it started to become a bit of a problem, and I'll touch on that a little bit in future slides. At this point, designs were funneled through a fairly centralized and co-located team. We didn't have a huge amount of offices at this point. Designers were generally sat in Edinburgh, all around the same bank of desks. Easy to collaborate, easy to check and chat with things. Switch forward a year. We squadified. We use this term quite a lot, and I'll give you some context to what we mean by this. Up until this point, this is what our org structure looked like, largely. We had a product team, design team, engineering team, and a growth team. And things were kind of handed between each of these, one by one, handing things over the wall and kind of hoping for the best. And it was at this point that engineering really started to become a bit of a bottleneck for the business. Having one big monolithic code base that every team had to contribute to meant that releases took up to 6 weeks. And that was starting to be a bit of a problem. So we looked to other internet economy businesses such as Spotify, Facebook, Google, and we largely took their kind of way of working through the squad and tribe model that Spotify had made famous. If you're not aware of that, I'll give you a quick intro to what that looks like. So essentially, these are small cross-functional teams made up of around 10 people. Each squad has a clear mission and are empowered to be fully autonomous. So you'll see here, we've got engineers, we've got a product manager, we've got a designer, and a growth specialist. And we have many of these teams. All look slightly different, but the same premise remains. And we group these into what we call tribes, and have many of these across the business. So at this point, pages and components started to become their own microservice. And from the good point of view, That really accelerated our ability to ship at scale. No longer were we releasing at 6 weeks. Each team were releasing multiple times a day now at their own heartbeat, independently of each other. But that did bring some challenges for us. Duplicated efforts and lack of sharing. So if we talk a little bit about that and look at some examples. Here you'll see our consumer website. And if you focus on the bit in the middle, you'll notice that there's some input fields there. Essentially a from, to, depart, return, cabin class, and passenger options with a big search button. The same thing appears in our corporate travel service as well. And then again, in our B2B offering as well. One of the biggest challenges we have, or had as a business, is being able to share things between multiple teams. And I'll talk a little bit about the kind of polyglot technologies that kind of led to some of the difficulties in sharing between these different teams later on. But one of the common things that we talk about here is the fact that our consumer site has a feature there on the left called multi-city. If a product manager comes along and says, hey, we want to take that multi-city feature and move it into our corporate travel service or into our B2B offering, it's not that easy to do. The other interesting challenge is around inconsistency amongst our products and platforms. So just like those big things that we talked about there, we also have some smaller things as well. So here you'll see some alert messaging. Essentially the same thing, albeit different copy, but it's essentially the same type of message. But we've got 4 different ways of showing that. And then my favorite, the close button. About 9 different close buttons here for no reason whatsoever. I will put my hand up and say I'm probably responsible for 5 of them. And that's mostly because sometimes finding the source of truth for these types of things is more work than it is to just create something new. In this case, it's quite easy to take 2 lines, rotate them 45 degrees, and place them over each other, and then you get another button. The other challenge for us was around making site-wide changes. They were incredibly difficult. So if we look here, we've got 3 call to action buttons. These 3 buttons used to appear on our flights, hotels, and car rental pages on the homepage. You might think they're all kind of the same, and you'd be right. They are kind of the same, but they're not the same. They're all implemented differently, and they all have their own teams that look after them, running their own experiments on them independently at any given time. And trying to sync up 3 teams in the business and compete with backlogs, prioritization, and opinions for a lot of the time is quite a hard thing to do, and it takes quite a lot of time. So we've had the good and the bad. Let's look at the ugly. With no standards whatsoever, this essentially results in a free-for-all, meaning that anyone can kind of do whatever they like. Some teams, unfortunately, don't have dedicated design resource or have limited access to designers, but they still need to get their job done. So what do? Well, in this example here, they decide to make up their own buttons and stretch them as long as a string of sausages, all in different colors, all in different ways. And that's just one small example of what could be potentially wrong with that page. So, we had to do something. My colleague, who's now our tech lead on the design system side, and I were really frustrated by all these points. So that kind of led us on our journey of design systems. So how do we get started? Well, we picked something which, for us, seemed really small. Unifying our color palette. How difficult can that be? For anyone that's tried to do that, you probably realize it's more difficult than you think. We did a bit of an audit. This is what our color palette looked like in reality. Absolutely crazy. The amount of shades of blue, green, and all the other colors there is kind of a bit ridiculous. It's probably resulted from various things. Over the years, people sampling stuff from old Photoshop documents or typing a hex code slightly differently. But then there's some in there as well, which I still don't know where it came from. The purple and the pinks. I've never seen that in any of our products, but it was there. So 3 of us got together, and we worked as a small team of designers to try and establish and test out this new color palette that we have here. We have a team of 40 designers in the business and growing. So naturally, we couldn't invite 40 people to come in and try and make up a color palette. That was just going to be crazy. So we managed to whittle it down. We managed to align our iOS, our Android, our web, our marketing, B2B, corporate teams all together so that we've got a set of primary colors, a set of secondary, and some neutrals as well. And at this point, it's worth pointing out that if we did nothing else, this was still a huge achievement. The effort that this took to align all these designers across the business was huge. But we still didn't have a way of sharing anything with engineering other than a set of hex codes. And we can see what goes wrong with those by typing the wrong one. So we published an NPM package of SAS variables. Fairly straightforward, really. We now had a way to share that amongst the engineering team. From there, it was a kind of hard sell, really. Trying to get teams to use something new alongside their existing work was really, really hard. No one really knew if this was going to work. No one really knew if it was going to stick about. Is this just another thing? But naturally, our team became the first adopters of it. And as they say, beer pays. It really does. We used any way possible to get our friends and colleagues on board and managed to convince people to give it a go. One by one, teams started using it, started to gain a bit of traction. And as a group of designers, it was natural that although we had standardized on this color palette, well, we're going to want to change it. But we now had a mechanism in place to do so. So it was time to make a bit of a business case. So from here, getting buy-in, we spoke with anyone, essentially, that would listen in the business, from managers through to C-level. And we presented all the benefits that design systems could bring. We showed them demos of our proof of concept. We shared links to other design systems, other blogs, what other companies were up to. And for us, it was really about an equal partnership between design and engineering. These types of projects can go 2 ways. Sometimes they become a static PDF style guide that the design team have come up with. Or it can go heavy on the engineering side as well. And for us, it was about aligning both teams, one independently, but most importantly, together. So, if we go back to the search button that we talked about a minute ago, generally the people we spoke to in the business, including those at C-level, nodded along and said, yep, can I get you? Design systems seem like a good thing, but not yet. It really wasn't until we kind of hit home on how much money as a business we were spending on something like a search button. Breaking it down into this kind of small detail of how many search buttons do we have across our products? How many designers are designing those? How many engineers are building them? How much time are we spending as a business on a search button? And that's the small things. It then adds up when you look at those search controls at the start that we talked about, plus all the other features that we have throughout our organization. So really, that's kind of when it started to hit home. How much money are we spending? But also, what potential revenue could we gain by speeding up the delivery for teams and getting stuff out in the hands of travelers quicker? So next up, my favorite GIF. Full-time team was formed. Still not worked out which one I am. You can decide that amongst yourselves. But we're essentially given 6 months to get the project off the ground and further prove its worth. So I'll share with you now a little bit about our approach, a little bit about what we believe in as a team, and some of the principles that make up our design system. So everything is formed from this statement here, this mission statement. We want to bring design and engineering together to enable squads to create beautiful, coherent products at scale. But that meant we need to standardize. We needed to standardize on the design side, but we also had to standardize on the engineering side. Part of the things that came with squadification, moving to that squad and tribe model, meant that any team in the business could choose any language that they wanted to author their applications in. And they did. That meant that we had things like jQuery, Angular, React, Backbone, you name it. And to be fair, they still exist in many places on the site today. So as a team, we worked with senior engineering members. We evaluated a few different front-end frameworks, and it really came down to two for us, React or Angular. In some respects, looking back, it doesn't really matter whether it was React or Angular that we chose. It was really about deciding to choose one. If you're interested, we chose React, mostly so that we could swap out that view layer at any stage, and we didn't end up with a huge, big framework such as Angular. We attended Clarity Conference in San Francisco. And if you don't know about Clarity Conference, it's a conference dedicated to design systems. We saw a lot of different companies present about their approach. Many of the same problems, challenges, and solutions were common between them. We also did a bit of a tech tour as well. Key learning here is that it's surprising how far a 30-day LinkedIn Premium trial can go. We reached out to anyone that we could think of in the San Francisco Bay Area to say, hey, we're coming to town, can we meet you? Probably about 200-300 messages later, we managed to get meetings with Salesforce, Facebook, Dropbox, Twitter, and Google. And it's surprising how open our industry is to be able to share learnings, and that's what's really great about coming here today, to share this with you and our story. So like most, we built on atomic design principles. If you're not aware of atomic design, it's a phrase that a chap called Brad Frost coined a few years ago. It's named in a way that it breaks up things from atoms and molecules, etc. Doesn't really matter. It really is about breaking complex apps into their component parts. So we adapted it to suit us a little bit. We have design tokens, the smallest thing in our design system. These could be things like color, like spacing, like type sizes, line heights, that type of thing. We have atoms, the smallest kind of usable thing on its own, such as buttons, icons, form inputs, that kind of thing. You get the idea. Groups of atoms form molecules, bigger things, maybe date pickers, maybe some auto-suggests, that type of thing. And then it gets bigger and bigger as it goes up the scale. But for us as a team, we were really keen not to essentially take every piece of front-end tech into our design system. We needed to maintain that level of autonomy with the squads themselves. So for us, we own, maintain, however you want to talk about it, these elements here. And the other bits are still owned by squads. If we look at things like search controls, those are really complex. There's a lot of business logic in there. There's a lot of translations and other things that make them up. They're just far too big for us to take as a team and do require that ongoing maintenance. But they are very much made up of the smaller pieces that us as a team help provide. But as I said, at the end of the day, whether something is an atom, a molecule, or whatever, it doesn't really matter. It really is about components that are made up of components. So after our color journey that we talked about, we moved on to typography and spacing. We firmly believed that if we could agree, standardize, and share typography and spacing styles across our teams, that we'd see big changes in our product. We implemented a baseline grid, essentially an underlying structure to help lay out things vertically. Just like as you would with horizontal grids, This helps set the spacing vertically. We implemented a native font stack as well. The design team really pushed and have pushed for a number of years to have a custom web font. But we all know about the performance issues that custom web fonts bring. And especially with the scale of which we operate, it's just not something that we're able to do at this point. So for us, using a native font stack, calling on the fonts that were installed on the devices of our travelers, meant that we could get nice typography without all the performance costs. If you're used to using native font stacks, you may notice that Segoe from Microsoft is missing. We had to remove that mostly because of the different baseline that it sat on. And hopefully at one point we'll be able to bring it back. So our kind of core principles for any type of components that we make as a team, there's 3 categories that these fall into. Accessibility. Up until fairly recently, if you used a screen reader on the Skyscanner website, it would read out the alphabet to you, followed by a set of numbers. It might eventually get to some useful content. Essentially, it was completely broken, and that's not cool. One of the talks at Clarity Conference last year that really resonated with me was a talk by Cordelia McGee-Tubb from Salesforce, ex-Dropbox engineer. And she talked a lot about baking accessibility in. So we do that as part of everything we do. The other thing that we've got in our design system is the ability to theme any of the components. Like many, we have a 2-sided marketplace, which means that we have travelers on one side but partners on the other. And for us, we need to be able to theme any component at any time to be able to show it off on our partner's brand. We also want to be able to support right to left for Arabic languages as well. So I talked a little bit about support and making sure that we support designers and engineers on this. The majority of our designers were using Sketch. And with that, and kind of one of the latest releases of Sketch 47 brings the ability to have a library of shared components with version control. But there's another big player in the market as well right now. InVision's DSM, Design System Manager, which they're bringing out shortly, looks set to really rival what Sketch is up to. So it'll be an interesting space to keep our eye on. And there's been many others as well. Craft from InVision that looks like it's going into DSM, UXPin, Zero Height, Brand AI that is now working with InVision on DSM as well. The other side is supporting engineers. So we've got different ways of consuming our design system. We have our design tokens in JSON format. We use a tool from Salesforce called Theo that allows us to transform any of these values into other variable types. For example, JavaScript variables, Sass variables, you name it. We have a set of Sass mixins. We've got React components. And we're also starting on React Native components as well. And generally, there's 3 simple steps to consuming any of these things. Simply npm install, import it into your project, and then declarative consume it in your application. So if we look just now at kind of adoption and where we're at, this here is what our mobile website used to look like about 6 months ago. And you'll notice some of the inconsistencies, some of the coherency problems just within these 2 simple screens. So as a design and engineering team, we worked hard to use our design system to move from this to this. Nothing groundbreaking from a design point of view, but nonetheless neat and tidy and more up to date. And this was mostly achieved through the design tokens and Sass mixins. Again, going back to the fact that many of our teams in the organization are using different technology stacks means that it's going to take time for us all to get to where we want to go. But design tokens and Sass mixins really helped us achieve that. And that's reflected here on our kind of adoption graph, if you like, for 2017. You'll notice back in January, we had quite low adoption. We had 6 months of getting up and running, properly kind of working on the adoption at that point. And the Sass stuff took off very quickly. React took a little bit of time, starting to see traction there now. And then the summer of this year is really when we started to work on our React Native stuff. In terms of adoption for React Native, it is a little bit different. Because with the SAS and React stuff, we've got multiple teams spread out with multiple code bases. With React Native, there's really only two code bases, the iOS one and the Android one. So this graph probably doesn't do that justice in terms of where we're at. The other thing I'd like to kind of chat a little bit is a little bit around the elephant in the room. We've chatted a lot about design and about engineering. But for us, working on design systems, the biggest challenge has been people. We spend an awful lot of time as a team collaborating, enabling, helping folk, trying to understand their challenges that people are facing, helping take away hard work so that many people can benefit. For example, we spent 2 months making a date picker. It's super accessible, works from right to left, can be themed however you like. It's so awesome that you might just want to unplug your mouse full time. But no team in the business would ever have had that opportunity to spend 2 months on a date picker. But we did that on the basis that no one else will ever need to build another date picker. So before I leave you and before I hand over to questions, I want to share some stuff that we found useful so far. So I mentioned sketch libraries. They're great. We've been working on them. We've been working with them for the last couple of months. The auto layout plugin for Sketch as well is super useful. It kind of builds on the built-in features of Sketch to be able to do responsive layouts and pin things to particular areas of the screen. But it allows you to do that in a much more accurate way. The other thing is Storybook. If you've not used React Storybook, I'd definitely get you to check it out. It's essentially an interactive development and testing environment, and has really been fundamental in some of the stuff that we've been doing. Lerna is a tool for managing JavaScript projects with multiple packages, and that too has been really useful for us. Theo from Salesforce is a tool that will take design tokens in JSON format and transform them to any other format that you need, including iOS and Android. And finally, Design System Slack. It's a Slack account run by Gina Ann, organizer of Clarity conference. And there's a huge amount of people in the industry working on design systems at the moment, all at different stages, all learning from one another. And I certainly recommend joining that if you haven't already. So before I leave you, this here is a slightly ugly link to our design system, which we hope you don't find ugly. At some point, we will make this a bit more friendly. But you can check it out. You'll be able to see where we're at and what's coming up. It's also open source. Thank you.